Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the rain. I'm pleased so many of you managed to make it through the storm to the Winvic Pavilion here this afternoon. I'm delighted to be moderating today. I'm James Hemstock from Prologis, and this session we're going to get under the skin of jobs, growth and place, and how we as an industry and sector specifically in logistics work to try and connect people with opportunity. I'm delighted to be joined today by Paul, Jules and Vicky, and I will hand over to each of them individually just to do a brief introduction. I think we've got some varied questions, we've got some key insight coming, and I will try to be as gentle as I can with you. So Paul, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sheltering from the rain. Winvic are offering free umbrellas, so I know the real reason you're here. I work at DP World, so we are an operator, owner, and investor of logistics, but also I'm responsible for the asset management team at London Gateway, which is 1,000 acres, which sits adjacent to London Gateway Port in the heart of Essex.
Jules.
I'm Jules. I'm the Managing Director of Mobility Ways. We work with large organisations like those sitting on this panel, but hopefully like a lot of you also sitting in the audience, to measure, report and reduce on commuter emissions. Often the question is, why is this important? And the importance is that often Scope 3 emissions are deprioritised. And it's not just about sustainability. That's a big part of what we do, trying to get organisations to net zero. But there are real operational challenges that come with commuting, and we'll unpick that as we go.
Vicky.
And I'm Vicky Klamuka, Head of Economic Growth at West Northamptonshire Council. We work very closely with our sector, including Prologis and others, to support our businesses, but also support our residents into employment and ensure that they can access employment sites and that our economy can grow.
Great, thank you. So in this session, we're really going to explore some data-driven insights to understand how that data can help with site selection, can help bring strategic employment sites forward, and how it can really strengthen the economic and social collaboration between private and public sector, but also how businesses can then connect with the talent that really drives them forward. So we're going to start with really what the picture is in terms of the reality on the ground. So I'm going to come to you first, Paul, if I may. So from your perspective, how often does labour and access to that labour determine site selection, or whether a site in itself is a success or a struggle?
Yeah, look, I think it's increasingly important. I think there's a misconception that everyone focuses on rent, but frankly, rent isn't the biggest driver of operational cost. Transport and obviously labour is a key concern. So you might have a cheap location, but if you don't have a relevant supply of employees, of employment generation nearby, then it's worthless. So I would say, in order to attract and retain talent, I agree, it needs to be the right building in the right location. So it's for me, I think most of our customers are asking, that's one of their key priorities.
And Jules, in your position, are you more increasingly finding that companies are reaching out to you to help with that gap?
100%. It's absolutely a attracting and retaining talent problem for a lot of our clients. I've got an example where, and I was physically there to witness it, so it was quite astonishing. I was at one of our car manufacturer clients, and the building is unbelievable. It was this gorgeous building, manufacturing site, but also sort of HQ at the same time. So glass windows. I was standing at the glass windows at shift switchover time, and what I witnessed was like nothing I've ever seen. It was the very start of our relationship with them, and there were grown adults physically running to their car to get into their vehicle to get off site before the rest of the shift from the next session came in, and before it caused so much congestion trying to get out that it took them an extra 30, 45 minutes. Now that can be incredibly emotive for an employee if they're tackling those sorts of issues at their place of work. So I think the accessibility is important, but the infrastructure of the site is equally important, and where that's why we're working with them to solve that problem, because it was really something to see.
It's an interesting point that you make there, because we've had similar examples at Prologis where we've been working closely with our customers to help them attract talent, and we had a scenario where we through yourselves actually helped that customer run a dedicated bus service to an area where they knew their employees were kind of clustered, and at seasonal peak they then put some job applications out, or and they saw a 500% growth in the success of those applications coming back to them, purely because there is now actually a viable transport link that kind of removed that barrier. So there's lots of real world examples out there that I think are quite powerful. I'm going to come to you next, Vicky, but we're going to change topics slightly. I think from your local authority perspective, you will see a huge variety of schemes coming forward, whereas we perhaps just see a small lens in our sector. But where do you think organisations, both kind of end users, but also ourselves as developers and landlords, can do better when they plan new sites or site expansions?
I mean, I think a key thing is that we work together from the beginning and don't think of the transport and getting employees to site as an afterthought.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot harder to retrofit and to solve the problem once you're in that position 100%. Than it is once, when you're at the planning stages. So, as an example, we were just talking to a developer who's building a site at one of our motorway junctions, and to talk to them at the kind of employment allocation site, pre-planning, and to sort of see that they're already engaging with, we're talking to local bus companies about could we improve the bus journeys and things at that stage is a lot easier than when the problem's already there. So I think it's how we come together as key stakeholders to solve those problems and learn from where we've made mistakes elsewhere. So plan from the beginning. So that's right, sort of even in the pre-planning stage. That we kind of start to look and start to do that planning rather than when the sites are occupied and the challenges are already in place.
100%.
And in these early discussions you're having with developers and stakeholders, are you seeing that they're becoming more reliant on data to inform that kind of accessibility of transport, or are they just solely kind of working out geographically where the towns are and thinking that's how they access those pools?
I think it's a bit of a mixture. I think it depends on the developer. I definitely think that data's playing more of a role in that, and I think there are tools that we've got access to now that we didn't have access to 5 years ago. How we use kind of some of the AI planning tools and things like that. The DFT connectivity tool and things like that. I know is a big part of kind of some of that early engagement with developers as well. But I think it's how we use the data along with some of the that's the quantitative side in a way, but it's also the qualitative stuff. It's the learning from sites that are already established in terms of at the end of the day, it's about people. You mentioned emotive in terms of, it's that qualitative learning as well, which is perhaps slightly more difficult to get from sort of some of that data.
And Jules, for you, particularly in your role, when people talk about data-driven decisions, in simple terms, what does that mean for you?
Well, I think there is a combination of organisations doing both, either the foresight of thinking about what data can tell you before you onboard a site. But I think the fundamental thing for us is learning, once a site is already established, what the art of the possible is. And so what we try and do is work with sites to understand what's happening today, but what could happen tomorrow. How could we look at clusters of employees, where they're situated, and you'll be surprised at the distance people are having to travel to get to employment. But those clusters are key clusters where there's also access to further candidates for roles within those sites. So it's important to understand where people are, how they're moving now, but also how could they be moving tomorrow. And what will that do for them and the organisation? We're in the midst of a fuel crisis, a 40-minute commute every day for someone who has to be on site every day is a lot of money. So if we can save those organisations money, and you mentioned quite nicely the 500% increase in applications because of putting on that transport for people, that accessibility is so important, but the data kind of has to drive what the solution is. If you don't know the art of the possible, how do you know that the solutions you're implementing are the right ones?
I think in terms of Paul's perspective as a landlord, when you're building these schemes from the ground up and master planning, how much are you working in silos in terms of your transport planning and your master planning, or are they all part of the same melting pot at the moment in those solutions?
So I think hopefully there's not too many planners in the room, but the local plan traditionally has employment and then it has transport as separate silos. But I think that's a historic basis. So I think now we are both as landowners and investors and operators working closer together, and I think the local authorities are far smarter about combining employment with transport, as Jules was saying. We've got quite a unique situation because we sit in Thurrock beside the River Thames. We know because the data proves that the operational workforce has resistance to anything beyond a 30-minute commute. Sam and I were just talking earlier about how does a 16-year-old afford insurance, let alone how does newly qualified drivers, for 17 isn't it, newly qualified drivers, how do they afford a car, let alone the insurance? So talked about transport, we talked about the costs. I mean, that's why we are turning to people like Mobility Ways to try and find far smarter solutions. Got all the data's great, but now we need to come up with solutions. And that's what you guys are working together to come up with those ideas.
And Vicky, from a local authority perspective, how do you at West Northants work on balancing the challenge of the employment site delivers the jobs, but then actually how do you balance that with the accessibility and the real deliverability of those jobs?
And I think I'll be honest, it can be a challenge. And I think, when you're balancing that, you're balancing kind of, what that business does and where it needs to be strategically located for, the sort of transport of goods side of what it does, particularly with logistics. They all want to be where they can be on the, on the motorway corridor, but that isn't necessarily where people live. So I think it is a challenge, but I think it's about how we come together, how we work with developers, work with partners, work with transport colleagues to look at solutions. So, for example, one of the sort of recent partnerships that our sort of transport team have led on is through our sort of bus improvement sort of funding is a strategic partnership with employers that's led by Go Travel Solutions, who Robin's here, who's sort of leading that partnership, and that brings together. At the moment we've got about 15 employers who represent, over 30,000 employees. And when you get to that kind of scale, you can potentially solve some of those challenges. Because if you talk to an individual operator, it's not necessarily easy to sort of say, we'll change that bus route and, we can, but when you're talking at that sort of scale and you can talk more strategically and plan more strategically, you can then potentially make those differences so that you can plan in, so using the example of the developer we were talking to earlier, they're already talking about, bus routes D1 and D3 or whatever, we, are looking at, can we add a stop, but that's planning well in advance to be able to do it. And I think if we work together in partnership to do that kind of thing, we can make those changes in the infrastructure more easily than, if we do it on an individual sort of occupier by occupier basis.
Yeah, I think you made a great point there in terms of reference to scale, but also the partnership piece. I see regularly working with our customers that they only really think about their own four walls, and they may well have a particular challenge that they've got. A lot of their workforce living in a certain location, and they're trying to provide accessibility to that for a variety of solutions. But they're doing it as one business on their own. they don't often work out that the business next door to them
Yeah.
could also be having the same challenge. And we actually had an example at Durft recently where we had one customer who was running a bus specifically targeted to a set postcode to keep talent retention, and they were running that at 50% full, and we're probably losing money as a result of that. And then we had a customer next door who was also running a bus to a very, very, very similar location at 50% full as well, and neither had spoke to each other. And I think we've got to be probably as an industry and a UK economy be more inventive in our thinking to try and unlock those opportunities, because they are there. But if you're only thinking about yourself, the chances of doing that are harder.
And I think that's where you guys come in the sense of being that convening role on the parks that you sort of develop and operate, because you can you're building that relationship across those customers, and you can then identify those connections, and by sort of holding those forums and those creating those networks on parks, I think that really helps, and it helps us as the local authority to then be able to kind of join in with that rather than kind of going and sort of speaking to them all individually.
And half the time it is that engagement on the ground. I think that's very much where we tend to get involved, is that engagement across a site so that everyone's getting the same information and it's not piecemeal.
And I think we've already spoken about a few of the challenges, but there's things currently that are working well across a variety of industries. We sit here purely from an industrial and logistics perspective, and have examples of where there's challenges for our industry and there's successes. But I think we're all trying to learn more from the wider built environment, the office sector, the leisure sector, how they do that. But in your experience, Jules, what's actually working well today? What are the most effective solutions that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I was told for this panel I was the data bod, so I thought I'd better bring some data. So we have been working with NZERC, a container glass manufacturer, about 1,000 people travelling to site, and when we did the analysis, we could see that actually a lot of them were travelling to site single occupancy vehicle. There wasn't enough parking, but 90% of them had an alternative viable travel option. So what they have done subsequently, and we're just at the end of year one of working with them, they decided to incentivise. So it was really simple, £1 for every sustainable journey you take. And we've seen a 6% reduction in single occupancy vehicle. So there's the carrot and the stick approach. I think they've chosen carrot. I think potentially a lot of what we do is a combination of the two, incentivise but also drive with policy. And some of the best rewards are, you'll be surprised what a free coffee does for a team, especially when it's from your staff canteen and it probably costs you pennies. To an employee, that's actually a pretty decent reward. So I think that's where we're seeing employers really step up in terms of their thinking.
And what innovation are you guys looking at down at London Gateway for?
We have a number of challenges which Vicky's alluded to. We have shift patterns. Both Port and Park is 24/7. So there are, again, some quite unique challenges. We've got the Dartford crossing, which is an additional toll for anyone who lives in Kent. So again, you come back to those sort of operational roles. It is quite challenging. What works? We have a travel plan. We have shuttle buses, like you described. We do incentivise car sharing with favoured car parking spaces, but that doesn't seem to be enough. So we are looking for the likes of Jules and Mobility Ways to help us for that conversation with the customers, and then to come up with the solutions, basically, because as I say, it's it's a challenge getting 2,000 people into the park each day.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're seeing as well is about transport optionality for people. There will always be a big reliance on the car because it is convenient. You can go when you want and where you want. There's added benefits of that you can now look to car share and lift sharing to try and reduce that commuting cost and the sustainable, benefits that has. But I think we're now seeing more things like Lime bikes becoming more regionalised into towns rather than just regional cities. You're seeing, provision of Voi electric scooters, love them or hate them, depending if they're scattered on curbs throughout the place. But that people are starting to find other ways of being able to get to work. Electric bikes that people own, we're now installing into our new build schemes. Electric bike charging in the bike racks and electric bike servicing to try and reduce that as a barrier. Yes, there's a cost implication to that for the commuter because they're significantly more expensive than a pedal bike. But I think just trying to layer up the different options we're seeing is having more success because it's giving people that opportunity to do something that they want rather than that is only available, I think.
Yeah. It has to be multimodal and it has to be an option amongst others. It can't just be forced on an employee or a workforce. That won't work. It has to be sort of habitual behaviour change over time with the carrot and the stick.
I like your analogy of learning from other sectors. I'm a logistics specialist, but I've worked in offices and, the end of trip facilities. I think we can learn a lot as a sector from the way the offices provide those end of trip facilities for cyclists, runners, electric vehicles, things like that. Yeah, it's a good takeaway.
Yeah, I mean that neatly comes on to our next talking point. So we were going to really talk about we've discussed some of the environmental benefits and some of the economic benefits of connecting people better with jobs. But really, I'm going to come to Vicky for this across the sectors that she sees. But what do you believe the societal benefits are that these solutions provide?
I mean, I think one of the things for, as local authorities, we want to grow our economies, but we also want, why do we want to do that? Because we want to provide a great environment for our residents and we want all of our residents to have opportunities. And when we think about the next generation and our young people coming through the system, we want to make sure they've got opportunities. And I think the challenge with transport to work is that, particularly for, say, our young people who haven't got, can't afford a car, or those, residents who haven't got access to a car, that potentially locks them out of so many job opportunities. According to AI, 40 to 60% of potential workers can be locked out of a job opportunity if there isn't viable public transport that could get them there within 45 minutes. Exactly. That's a huge percentage of the workforce. And for an employer and for an employment site, that's their potential labour force that they're missing out on. But for us as a local authority, that's our residents who haven't got the same level of opportunity available to them as those that could get to the site because they've got access to their own transport. So I think, if we can solve some of these challenges, it helps, and one of our local transport plan priorities is around reducing inequalities through our transport solutions. So it helps with that. Equally, it has knock-on benefits from sort of, we've got quite a rural population. We've got some big urban centres as well, but we've got a rural population. If we're putting on additional bus services to get to those out-of-town parks, but actually it means that rather than a once-a-day bus for the village that's, 3 miles down the road, it's, it's a couple of times an hour or whatever, then it has those wider benefits as well. And I think particularly for areas where you've got that, rural areas definitely have that transport challenge more than urban areas are. So I think, if you can solve some of those problems, it provides that wider benefit to the rural economy as well.
I think very much at the moment there's a standard that the UK property industry looks to deliver. I think what we're increasingly seeing for the parks that Paul and I are involved in, to be successful, you've got to go that extra mile. But I'm coming to you now, Paul, in that how do you make the business case for perhaps going the extra mile and investing, more funds in transport solutions or variety, when that's traditionally not been seen as the landlord or the developer's problem? It's often been the customer, kind of the end user's challenge.
Yeah, I come back to the point about learning from other sectors, and learning from other. You guys do a great job at Daventry, for example, at Durft, You talk about ecosystems. I talk about campus, trying to create a logistics campus. Fairly new into the role, by the way, so anything that's gone before is not my problem. But we've got a vision for the park where we aspire to have, frankly, it's an infrastructure campus where we can provide facilities, on-site facilities, just like you've got the hub. We're going to build the hive as an on-site amenity for upskilling and training those staff that are on site, for example. How do we get the people there in terms of the cost? It is an additional cost up front, but I suppose the argument is rather than it just being a transport cost, it's an investment, it's a commercial investment decision, because if you solve it up front, then you can access, for example, I know there's 25,000 out-of-work people in the local Thurrock within 30-minute drive time or 30 minutes transport time. So I've got customers who are desperate for employees. So how do we get some of those 25,000 people to our site? So we need to solve it, and I agree, it might be a mixture of public transport, bicycles, and all sorts of other innovative ideas. So to answer your question, I think we've got to look at it more from a landlord's point of view. You've got to think of it more as it's an investment, it's a commercial investment. It's just not a cost. And then a throwaway comment is a lot of it you can probably push through the service charge, but you guys tell me that. I don't know.
I'm going to helpfully say no comment to that. So I think industrial logistics is currently an increasingly busy sector for the UK. More or less everything we touch in our lives comes through a warehouse in some shape or form, and it's vastly moving up the government's scale in terms of being seen as critical infrastructure. But I think there's still often a perception issue around logistics and warehousing jobs. And Vicky, I'll come to you with this. How much do you think that is perhaps holding the sector back, because you get to see all sectors that are coming through, your local authority?
Is it holding this? I think you're doing quite a good job as the sector, I will say. I mean, we are on the M1, we're sort of centre of the country on the M1, so we are a big logistics area, and we attract, a large, some large sites, including Durft. When you talk about the campus model and, what they have at Durft is a training hub as well, which helps, I think, to provide that campus. Yes, it's a place where, customers can train staff, or we can train unemployed people to kind of come through the sector. But it's also a bit of a kind of like a showcase, if you like, for the park. It's a hub. Quite often when I'm there, you see people just having, there's benches outside. They've popped out to have their lunch, and actually, rather than what you traditionally thought of as those logistics parks, just the big sheds and nothing else. Actually, there is definitely far more of a campus feel to them, and I think that does help to, to attract the workforce. But I think we need to continue to work with you guys as the sector evolves. We talk in our economic strategy a lot about advanced logistics, and as your sector evolves with that technology, how do we make sure through our colleges, through our skills, that we've got the people with the skills for the future for those jobs, so that the sector evolves and the sort of quality of the job evolves as well. We've got funding for skills boot camps, for example, which is very much entry level training courses to help people get into the sector. But how do we make sure we've got those skills pathways through our kind of local colleges and local universities, to make sure that people see that actually this is not, your traditional view is not what it is. We've got at Northampton Gateway, which is a Segro site, we've got an Amazon opening, this month. Their general manager was in software development in Silicon Valley, and is now managing an Amazon site in Northampton, because actually the tech that they require in that site to make sure that you get your parcel next day is mind blowing. And actually, we need to be selling the stories more of those stories, really, particularly to our young people coming through the system, to change that reputation of logistics.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for me it's you can't solve one challenge without necessarily solving the other, because if you focus solely as an industry on trying to change the perception of industrial logistics to the next generation of people, you can't then convince them to come and work in industrial logistics if you can't solve the barriers to entry by being able to get them to the parks. It's so much easier for that next generation to go and look for employment in town or city centres, because the connectivity is there for them, regardless of whether their skills are best utilised in those roles or whether they would be perhaps better in industrial logistics. So I think both challenges have to be solved hand in hand. And Jules, coming to you in terms of that type of cross-sector experience, what are you finding in terms of how the people that you necessarily deal with perceive industrial logistics versus other sectors?
I think culturally they're deemed quite different sectors to work in. I think that there is an openness to those kind of sectors. I think it's just understanding what they're trying to achieve, understanding what they're trying to do in terms of build a career. But I think I feel like there is a vast opportunity. A lot of the time it's not the skill set that's the issue, it's the geography. And so that is one of the key things that we're trying to support organisations with, is getting to the right calibre of candidate that they might not necessarily find, and vice versa.
And in terms of kind of resolving this as a challenge going forward, who do you think should own this problem? Is this, should this be led by developer, bottom up, or should it be coming from national government, top down, with local authorities and devolved authorities somewhere in the middle, trying to link it together?
I mean, dare I say it, part of the problem is that it isn't owned. So, that is what we often find. The developers do the build, and the government support infrastructure that's already there, but don't support budgets to serve sites that are new. And so I think it stems back to what you rightly said about collaboration and partnership. I think it's all of the above. I think it has to be.
And Vicky, you talk about kind of the local authority position. You were talking about some of the grants and incentives and areas you're looking at that. But do you think current funding models from national government are sufficient to try and really unlock this growth that we're all desperate to see in the UK?
Not necessarily. I think in some areas, yes. And certainly the funding is welcome. I think one of the challenges is funding is often short-term cycles, so you haven't got the longevity to make it sustainable in the longer term. So often it's like, you spend it within this year or you lose it, and then does it then go to the most effective things? I do think in areas where you've got combined authorities, you've potentially got that ability to do some of that longer term strategic thinking on some of this stuff, and some of the funding that then comes with that to make that difference at a local level. But often, one of the challenges we have is that funding can be quite siloed in terms of, where the different pots of funding come from, and it's how you then join some of it together. Yeah. And, really you could do with longer term funding and more of it, and more flexibility in terms of how it applies to the local, which in our because we're not in a combined authority area currently, so our perspective is that in those combined authorities, it's like, money grows on trees and it's all wonderful. But I know we've got some combined authorities in the audience who may pop my balloon on that perception.
I was just going to say, it comes back to perception, it comes back to what you talk about, both private and public working together. I think, just as a reminder, the logistics sector contributes 170 billion. Here's a stat, you'll like this. 170 billion to the UK economy. Okay, so that puts it up there with digital and tech. It employs about 3 million people in the UK, represents 8% of the UK workforce, right? So we should be shouting about that. This is a massively sexy sector, a massively growth sector, just as good as digital and tech. why should data centers get all the fun? And that's a digital. What do they call it? They call it critical infrastructure. Well, what we're doing is critical infrastructure. So let's get you guys. Prologis are excellent at this. Let's raise the profile of logistics. Let's shout about it. Let's make it a career path for children. And and as you say, let's combine local authority and public and private funding together. That's the answer to your stakeholder question. Everyone owns it.
Yeah, and I think we're slightly beneficial at the moment as a sector that because it has been seen as a growth sector by property investors, we've now got more competition. If we were to sit here probably 10 years ago, you may well have Prologis, Segro, and a handful of big traditional developers that have been doing it a long time. Now we've got such a plethora of different organisations doing it, and there is more choice for customers. Well, for us, sat here, how do you compete against choice? Well, you have to raise your game. You have to offer better solutions to customers. You have to offer better quality to compete in that respect. So I think we are seeing the standard of parks, the standard of builds, the standard of welfare and societal benefits that these parks are trying to bring to the local economy, being the quality be going much better. But I think the next journey on that is that how do then people try and differentiate and shake up the market in a different way, to kind of continually keep raising the bar. I think everyone's now got to a point where the E of ESG I think is perhaps kind of it's a given. Everyone builds that into their quality. How do we now start to target the S of ESG? And I think that's the next bit that we're all trying to go on. I think if we, I'm going to Paul for the next section where we've spoken a lot about the UK here, but you're from a global business. And do you think the UK's challenges are unique, or are you seeing anything across your global business that we could learn from in the UK?
I think the UK is pretty advanced. It's pretty unique because of the growth of e-commerce, for example, and we are a densely populated island. So we have perhaps accelerated, as you say, over the last 10 years in terms of development of logistics. I think there is quite a lot we can learn from overseas. I think we can learn from Asia in terms of the way they build things. From a DP World point of view, if you look at Jebel Ali, which is, again, it's another economic free zone, similar to the Thames Freeport. But, Ian and I were talking earlier about architecture, and, I just get a bit fed up building a steel portal frame with a roof on it. Let's do something exciting, and let's embrace green technology. Let's embrace low carbon concrete, green steel, and things like that. And again, it's just debate to take offline, but we're in quite a unique position because we're developers owners, right? We're not just developing and selling it for a 15% return on cost. We've got to live with the product and live with the campus and try and then deal with the occupiers, customers who need to get to our sites. So, from that point of view, I think it's quite a unique perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things we see at Prologis with our global portfolio is, I think everyone's got different challenges in different jurisdictions globally, but they manifest in slightly different ways because of certain cultural differences. But I think the one challenge that remains globally for us is if you're trying to position the sector as critical infrastructure, I think we would all walk around Leeds city centre today and would walk through some of the public realm and go, this is really good quality public realm. Or we go to an office park and we say, this is a good office park. But then people go to a logistics park and the argument is often, well, we need logistics. Well, so why should we be able to get away with building an average logistics park? You don't allow people to get away building an average retail destination or average public realm. So I think we've got to task ourselves to come up with better solutions to make it, to get to that point that what does good look like, and we want to be at the forefront of delivering that as a sector and as and the businesses that we are. I think in terms of how we then, move the accessibility bit forward. Technology, I think, if we look over the last 10 years of where we were, electric scooters weren't there, Lime bikes and so forth weren't there. I'm going to ask you this to probably Jules being, on the forefront of this. Where do you think technology is going to take us in the next 10 years?
I mean, in terms of transport, I thought we'd have autonomous vehicles by now, but that's obviously a nightmare. So I think there will be the ability for more adaptable places of work. I think that the way that AI is accelerating, we need to adopt it. We have to adopt it. We have to get on board with it and look at it as just doing more with the same rather than taking away anyone or anything. So I think there has to be a push for electrification. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near our net zero goals with it. And I also think the way that the economy is going and inflation and fuel prices, energy prices, we have to be thinking smarter about how we move people and what that actually does for their pockets.
And coming to Vicky on that, where do you think it will be in the next 10 years' time?
I mean, even though I totally agree autonomous can be a nightmare, and I think the biggest challenge we've got with that is the policy environment for it.
Yeah.
I would like to see that we were able to utilize that more, demand responsive transport that's autonomous. We've got buses in Milton Keynes, which is, our neighbour, but they have to have a driver. Driverless buses with a driver because although the technology is there to be driverless, our policy, we haven't got, the legislative side has not caught up yet, if you sort of mean.
Yeah.
And I know, as citizens of society, we want to make sure that the legislation is right. None of us want to be ploughed into by a driverless vehicle, but equally, if the technology's there, I would like to see a situation where we get to the stage where actually, for our rural areas, they can go on an app and there's a demand responsive driverless vehicle that can pick that young person up and get them to site, and actually that's a cost-effective solution because we're not paying a driver. That's where I'd like to see.
Okay. Same to you, Paul?
Well, tongue in cheek, going to say we're all going to travel by drones or something, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, that was the vision. I live in Putney, and London Gateway is obviously still on the Thames, so I dream of an electric water taxi. There you go. That's the challenge.
Oh, nice.
The serious question is, technology is an enabler to help solve some of these problems, and whether it's an app, as I say, you go into a land securities building, you've got an app that tells you everything you need to do. So maybe we should embrace that.
I don't think that's a bad position to be in. So I think we're nearly out of time. We've got one final question just to wrap this up. So if you could change one thing tomorrow to better connect people with opportunity, what would it be? And I'll go this way with Paul starting.
Go that way. Can you not start over there? So what was it? If I could change one thing
If you could change one thing tomorrow that you think would better connect people with opportunity, what would it be?
Okay. Education, as I say, and I mean that in every sense. Educate the perception of this wonderful sector, which can provide. Not everyone has to go to university. We've got apprenticeships, we've got boot camps, we've got all this upskilling that we can do across this sector. So let's get away from this misconception of sheds and lorries, and let's fly the flag for logistics.
I think that's a good point on that. I mean, for me, one of the things that's in my career in logistics that's always staggered me is that logistics still probably remains one of the true meritocracies as an industry. You can go and talk to the managing director of DHL, and he started off as a trainee on the warehouse floor, and then moved up through the ranks, GM, to that type of level of business. And you don't often find that in industries anymore. That entry level jobs are graduate or master's degrees, and I think we forget that about our sector and how it does have that opportunity for growth through it. So I like that. Jules, for you?
I'd look at this slightly different. I think we've touched on scenarios of there's a role at a logistics park, pays 30 grand, it's 40 minutes away, you don't have a car. My urge would be for boards and leadership teams to be asking the question at that level, how does your workforce get to sites and who can't? Because I think more often than not, our data is really surprising our clients. And they are missing a whole workforce that exists. The person exists, the job exists, but the connection doesn't. And so, yeah, I would urge for that question to be asked at that level.
And Vicky?
I think I will finish with collaboration. We've talked a lot about that. But I think that although, you know, in many ways I'm like, we want to look to the future, what's the innovation of the future to solve some of these things? Actually, within the system exists a lot of parts of the solution that actually if we, and you know, I know we come together and we collaborate, but if we found a way to bottle it in a really succinct way, I think there's actually a lot of the solution that already exists in the system. You know, we're just not always joining it up in a very effective way. So if we could bottle it and join it up in an effective way, I think we could make that difference tomorrow.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. I hope you've dried off. The weather has improved, which is always helpful. I'd like to thank my panelists today. So thank you to Paul, thank you to Jules, thank you to Vicky for joining us. We hope you've had an insightful look around labour, connectivity and an opportunity. So thank you all very much. Thank you.